Adam Booth here, Upshift Online. Out here in the mountains of Idaho, we've been riding all day these two amazing motorcycles. KTM 350 EXC, plated 4-stroke, awesome. And to this side of me is the Husqvarna TE300i, fuel-injected 2-stroke. So there's some big differences between these motorcycles. The obvious one is 4-stroke, 2-stroke, 300, 350. But there's also huge differences out on the trail. There's a little bit of weight difference. Of course, the motors are going to deliver power 100% different. There's going to be a fan base for 2-strokes. There's going to be a fan base for 4-strokes. Another major difference, plated, ride anywhere. Not plated, plateable in some select states in this country, not all of them. So Upshift has had both these motorcycles for a few months, and you can't leave anything stock. That's not much fun at all. So this TE300i has Nitro Mousse bib inserts. They're a little softer, give a little more feel, and zero chance of flats. Also, it has Shinko Cheater compound tires on there, so those are even more giving, more grip on wet rocks, soft rocks. Not great for super high speed, but for trail riding and maximum traction, those are awesome. Pro Circuit pipe, muffler. It has some Trail Tech radiator guards, and it has some P3 carbon protection all over it as well. Also has a Trail Tech little GPS system on there, which is awesome. So the KTM 350 EXC also has some modifications. Race Tech massager suspension, Pro Circuit slip-on muffler, Aries rear disc guard. It mounts kind of its own unique way, which makes it easy to put on. Of course, both the bikes have Upshift graphics. But on the KTM 350 here, we have Dunlop tires, the 81 series, with heavy-duty tubes. So there is a little more chance of flats on that, and it doesn't have quite the same feel as having the Nitro Mousse insert on the tires. We added seat concept seats on both of these. They kind of flare out right where you can slide your butt back to get a little more comfort, and then you slide forward into your aggressive position and they're more narrow. So that's a benefit, especially if you're out on the trails all day. You don't want too much monkey butt. So the KTM 350 here looks a little different because it's all white plastic from UFO, even the handguards. I personally love the white look on this bike, and the plastic seems to be holding up great. So we've been riding these bikes back to back all day, mix of fire roads, 2-track, and of course, amazing Idaho single track. There's very distinct differences between these two motorcycles. They both do the job of riding trails very, very well. Everyone's gonna have a different preference. The 2-stroke, 4-stroke battle has been raging forever, and you're gonna have diehards screaming, this sucks, or this is awesome, or what, 2-stroke for life, or I bleed 2-stroke. It's kind of just a silly deal, but there is major differences when you're out on the trail riding. So one of the major additions on this TE300i was the addition of a Recluse auto clutch. Now a lot of people say, oh, that's silly, or that's cheating, or that's unnecessary. Until you've ridden one on a fuel-injected 2-stroke, you're not going to understand how good it is. This thing will crawl at walking speeds, never touch the clutch, the fuel-injected 2-stroke idles, and the best thing about a fuel-injected 2-stroke is they do idle. You push the start button, they idle all day, and then you crack the throttle and you go riding. So that's a major cool thing about fuel injection. I know that in the past I've ridden a lot of 300s, 250s with carburetors, and they just never idle right. You can't trust them to idle, and that makes it harder for an auto clutch when you know your bike isn't going to idle. But this thing is ridiculous. So what I feel the most between a 2-stroke and a 4-stroke is usually the weight difference, the way the motor spins, the gyro effect on how you feel coming on and off throttle. The big difference with this, with the auto clutch on the 300 fuel-injected bike, is it rolls on really soft. It's not crazy excitable right off idle. You can change that by snapping the clutch and giving a little revs. But with the 350 4-stroke, the response is right at idle. Give it a little throttle tension on the cables, and it barks and it's ready to go, and there's tons of just low-end grunt. That's really fun when there's good traction, but when you get into really tight, maybe switchbacks that are almost walking speed, or it's cobbly and there's roots and traction is a must, the 350 is still good, but you have to cover the clutch. You have to be that control, and you have to be careful with the right hand, because a quick right hand will get the wheel spinning quick. The 300, I figured out today, was unbelievable when it was almost walking speeds, starting on a hill or crawling up a very technical trail, because with the auto clutch, you literally don't touch it. It can drop down to idle and you just roll on the throttle, and it is traction control. It just gets that tire rolling. And with a bonus, of course, is the sticky compound Shinkos. Those things hook up amazing as well. I liked the 350 4-stroke. It's a little more stable at speed. It's more fun to roll on a corner and just, kind of get a nice big rooster tail swoop through a corner. Whereas the 2-stroke, it does rev up, and then it'll kind of get on the pipe sometimes and be a little barky. But again, the 2-stroke, you can kind of play with that. If you want to upshift and lug it with the clutch, you're good. The 4-stroke, again, it feels a little heavier, and it is a little heavier on the scales, but you feel the weight a little more when you're really trying to flick through the single track. There's guys who love them both. I don't care either way. In certain really extreme conditions, I'm gonna go with this with the auto clutch to save energy and make sure I get through it. Longer days on more fire roads 2-track, I'm gonna go with that 4-stroke that just rolls on the throttle and has tons of traction. This is almost an apples to oranges comparison. These are both trail bikes, obviously. One has a plate on it, one doesn't. One's a 2-stroke, one's a 4-stroke. For the guy who lives in a state like California or other places where can't even dream of riding a 2-stroke anywhere that's cool, the plated bike, man, put a Recluse in it, put an auto clutch, kind of adjust the 4-stroke to be what you want it to be. That's the beauty of it. At some states you're gonna get a plate on this 2-stroke, and that might be your be-all end-all bike, and that's awesome too. So throughout riding today, I'd switch back and forth through these bikes all day. Like every half hour, I'd switch to the bike and then to another bike. And I'd get on a bike and initially it felt weird, or I thought, oh, this does amazing. This is so much better than the other bike, or this isn't as stable through the rocks. And then I'd get riding and I'd adjust my style a little, or start covering the clutch or dragging the brake here, and I'd feel great on it. And then I'd jump back to the other bike and I was like, oh, I thought this bike did this better. And all of a sudden I'm not liking this, and then I'd roll back into adjusting my style, and then I'd be right back in love with that bike. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if you're gonna pick a bike, pick it, adjust it for you, and love it, because there's really nothing horrible about any of these bikes. They're both awesome. So sometimes it's the grass is always greener on the other side is so true, because you get on it, you adjust, it's awesome, you get back off it, and your brain starts bouncing around a little bit. So if I'm riding Idaho trails all day and I can drive my truck right up to the trailhead and disappear for 100 miles of single track, I personally probably going to lean towards this 300 fuel injected motorcycle, because it is simply amazing in the trails. On the single track, it's still fun on the faster stuff. So if I want to travel out of state, go meet some buddies, ride in a different area that doesn't just allow you to park and ride a non-plated bike to the trailheads or to get to different trails, I got to do the 350. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a Recluse in it, maybe adjust the suspension even further to the riding conditions, probably go with some sticky tires, which make a huge difference in the rocks and slower riding, and make my 4-stroke just as good as the 2-stroke. But again, we're comparing apples to oranges a little bit, just kind of giving you some information, how we feel about riding the two different bikes and just loving riding. So I've ridden 2-strokes a lot of off-road bikes, a lot of 4-strokes, and I've always a little bit leaned towards loving 2-strokes. They're lighter, they're more simple, but they don't have a plate, which is always a downfall in California, but that doesn't matter in a lot of places. So we had stock suspension on this 300, which worked pretty well. But my past, I know that every time I have a 2-stroke of any sort, I add a steering stabilizer. It just calms down the actions of a 2-stroke. 2-strokes tend to be a little less planted feeling when you're riding, so as you're hitting stuff, the bikes just feel more lively. In the past, adding a stabilizer has really calmed down any 2-stroke I've ever owned, keeps them in a straight line. Of course, you can adjust the stabilizer. The 4-strokes in general, they kind of don't need stabilizers as much. You go through the same river bottom on both these bikes. The 4-stroke feels a little more planted, it's a little heavier, and the way the motor delivers power, it just kind of trudges through the rocks. The 2-stroke is a little more happy, a little more lively, and a stabilizer just solves all of those issues. So you've heard me talk about this over and over: tire pressure, tire compound. It's the last connection between you and your dirt bike and the ground. Well, it makes a huge difference on how your bike performs. You can spend $1,000 on suspension, or you could try out a sticky tire with a mousse that's soft, or go with a really heavy duty tube and lower the pressure, and I promise you, your bike will feel 100% different. It's always a compromise. If you're gonna ride loamy dirt without rocks, regular compound tires with tubes is great setup. That's what it's designed for. But if you ride single track at slower speeds, you're riding over a lot of roots and wet conditions, boulders, stuff where you're not going crazy fast and gonna pinch a tire or rip off knobs, going with that new sticky compound tire from a lot of manufacturers and some sort of softer mousse insert, kind of like the Nitro, is going to make a massive difference in how your bike performs. I mean, I promise you, you could take a stock bike, stock tire, stock inner tubes, ride it, and switch out the tires and tubes and go ride it again, and you think you'll have a different bike. So of course, these things feel different on the trail. The 4-stroke is a little more snappy. It's right off idle, so if you come through a little single track corner and bark, it just goes. I tended to ride this 2-stroke a lot like I ride my mountain bikes, where I kind of just up in the standing position, I'm up a gear tall, I let the auto clutch kind of drag the clutch a little, and I just really smooth with the throttle, and I almost try to just swing and carry my speed through the corners with momentum. Whereas the 4-stroke, you tend to sometimes be a little more point and shoot. You come in a little hotter, brake slide, and then the power's instant, so you're shooting back out of the corner. That's adjustable on a two-stroke. I mean, you can dump the clutch, you can rev it, but the way these fuel-injected two-strokes roll on the power is so smooth, and then mix that with an auto clutch, and it's almost like an electric thing going, and once in a while, stab the clutch for a little bark. The benefit to a two-stroke is that if you slide off the trail or you have issues or you drop it, it's noticeably lighter. That weight goes away a little bit once the speeds increase between the two bikes, but in general, the two strokes just feel more flickable and more manageable in tight situations. All right, Adam Booth signing off from a day of riding in Idaho. Don't be mad. I love two strokes. I love four strokes. Be sure to follow Upshift Online.